Lucille Ball, the woman who made the world laugh until their sides hurt, yet carried more secrets in her heart than anyone ever imagined. For decades, she was America's comedy queen, bold, brilliant, fearless, and unforgettable. But behind the bright red hair, the perfectly timed jokes, and the sitcom magic that defined an entire era, Lucille Ball was a woman shaped by the men she worked with. Men she admired deeply. Men she trusted. Men who pushed her, inspired her, and changed her life in ways the public never knew. Recently uncovered interviews, old letters, and private conversations from those close to her reveal a truth that fans are only now beginning to understand. Lucille Ball had 6 actors she quietly admired more than anyone else in Hollywood. She never bragged about them. She never used their names for publicity. Instead, she spoke of them privately, as mentors, equals, and sometimes as the emotional anchors that helped her survive the pressures of fame. These 6 men saw the real Lucy, the perfectionist, the fighter, the woman who refused to quit even when Hollywood tried to break her. Some guided her. Career. Some challenged her creatively, and others offered comfort during the loneliest moments of her life. Their names were rarely mentioned publicly, but in her final years, Lucille finally allowed the truth to surface, revealing just how much these 6 actors meant to her. This is the untold story of the bonds that shaped a legend. And the 6 men Lucille Ball admired more than the world ever realized. Long before she became the unstoppable force behind I Love Lucy, long before her name lit up marquees and changed the future of television forever, Lucille Ball was a woman fighting her way through the toughest, most unforgiving era in Hollywood. She knew rejection. She knew heartbreak. She knew what it meant to start from nothing and claw her way to the top using nothing but grit, instinct, and a work ethic forged from pure determination. But what many people don't know is this: Lucille Ball didn't rise alone. Behind her strength were a handful of men who shaped her creativity, pushed her limits, and inspired the comedic brilliance the world came to love. These were not love affairs. These were emotional alliances, silent bonds built on respect, admiration, and shared battles inside the unpredictable machine of Hollywood. Lucille never forgot the early years, the long days as a contract player, the endless auditions where she was told she wasn't pretty enough, not glamorous enough, not talented enough. And yet, there were a few actors who saw deeper. They noticed the spark in her eyes, the sharp mind behind her comedic timing, and the resilience woven into her voice. These men became guideposts in her journey, examples of discipline, artistry, and character. Some were older, seasoned actors whose confidence helped her find her own. Some were co-stars who treated her as an equal before the world recognized her genius. Others were men she simply watched from afar, studying their techniques, absorbing their presence, and building her own identity as a performer. Lucille was a woman who learned by observing. She was a sponge, absorbing talent and wisdom wherever she could find it. And the 6 actors she later admitted admiring weren't chosen at random. They were men who carried qualities she believed were essential to greatness: courage, integrity, vulnerability, and an unshakable commitment to their craft. To Lucy, admiration was never about fame or charm. It was about watching someone bring honesty to the screen. It was about witnessing a performer's soul through their work. It was about recognizing the kind of rare talent that elevates everyone around them. In private conversations with friends, Lucille sometimes spoke about how lonely Hollywood could be. Even at the height of her success, with millions laughing at her every week, she felt the weight of responsibility, pressure, and perfectionism. The world saw the jokes and the laughter, but they never saw the nights she stayed up rewriting scripts, coaching fellow actors, or battling with studios who doubted a woman could lead television's biggest empire. In those moments of exhaustion, she often drew strength from the men she admired. Their voices, their performances, their lessons, they became reminders of why she started in the first place. They kept her grounded, inspired, and focused during the hardest chapters of her life. What's fascinating is that Lucille rarely spoke publicly about these 6 actors. She protected her private world fiercely, but in her later years, reflecting on a lifetime of triumphs and struggles, she finally began to share pieces of the truth. Not gossip, not scandal, but gratitude. Gratitude for the men who helped her grow, supported her, and taught her lessons she carried into every episode, every joke, every step of her groundbreaking career. These 6 actors weren't just colleagues or distant icons. To Lucille Ball, they were the quiet heroes of her journey. If Hollywood had a beating heart during the Golden Age, Lucille Ball was the pulse running through it, bright, restless, unpredictable, and endlessly magnetic. And as her stardom grew, so did the whispers. Studios tried to control her image. Gossip columnists tried to expose her flaws. And Hollywood insiders quietly traded stories about the actors she was rumored to be unusually close with. No one ever confirmed anything, not Lucy, not the men, not the studios, but the rumors formed their own mythology. A shadow story running parallel to the legend the world knew. One of those whispered names was Desi Arnaz, even before they married. People saw the fire between them long before their romance went public. That dangerous mix of passion, arguments, and reconciliation that left studio photographers scrambling to capture their chemistry. Their relationship was explosive, messy, and irresistible. Hollywood rarely saw a bond that powerful, and naturally, it sparked rumors that their connection began long before they admitted it. Some claimed it was inevitable. Others insisted it was immediate. What everyone agreed on was that the spark between them was impossible to miss. Then there were the stories involving William Holden, the charismatic leading man who charmed nearly every room he walked into. Lucy always said Holden had a smile that could melt an iceberg, and their on-set banter quickly caught attention. Were they just 2 megastars enjoying a flirtatious friendship? Probably. But studio staff remembered late-night rehearsals, secretive conversations, and a warmth between them that looked a little too natural for comfort. Again, nothing confirmed, nothing proven. Just Hollywood doing what Hollywood does best, assuming the worst or dreaming up the most dramatic possibility. Another name whispered in private circles belonged to Henry Fonda, the tall, soft-spoken actor whose quiet intensity intrigued Lucy. They worked in the same industry but lived in different emotional worlds. Lucy was vibrant and expressive. Fonda was introspective and guarded. Their supposed closeness fascinated insiders who swore they saw a deep respect, maybe more. But like every story from that era, it was built on hints, glances, and incomplete memories. No paper trail. No admissions. Just echoes. Hollywood also buzzed about Lucy's connection with Robert Mitchum, the rugged bad boy whose reputation terrified studio executives and thrilled audiences. Mitchum admired strong women, and Lucy was the strongest woman in Hollywood. Rumors started because of their rebellious personalities, not because of any real affair. Still, people loved the idea of the Queen of Comedy and the King of Trouble sharing a private chemistry. Whether it was true or just a fantasy invented by gossip writers desperate for a headline, no one will ever know. Then there was Orson Welles, the genius with a storm behind his eyes. He and Lucy bonded over ambition, perfectionism, and their frustration with the limitations of the Hollywood system. Their conversations were intense, intellectual, and private. Too private, according to some observers. But again, it was all speculation. Welles respected Lucy deeply, and she admired his artistry. That alone was enough for tabloids to imagine an entire forbidden romance. And finally, the softest rumor of all, James Stewart, the gentle soul who represented everything Lucy sometimes wished Hollywood could be, calm, kind, and uncomplicated. Their friendship was genuine, and it irritated no one except the rumor mills, which insisted that no man and woman in Hollywood could ever simply be friends. Of all the names tied to her, Stewart's was the one most people dismissed. But still, the whispers lingered. Across her life, Lucille Ball was surrounded by legends, and Hollywood, hungry for scandal, invented its own mythology about her relationships. Whether any of these rumors held truth or were merely fantasies spun from jealousy, admiration, or imagination, one thing was undeniable. Lucy inspired stories because she lived larger than life. The real question was never who she loved behind the scenes. It was why Hollywood was so obsessed with defining her through the men around her, even when her real power came from something far deeper. For Lucille Ball, fame was both a crown and a cage. The world adored her, But Hollywood watched her with a magnifying glass, dissecting every glance, every friendship, and every moment that seemed even slightly out of place. And as the rumors about her private life continued to swirl, Lucy found herself caught between the woman she truly was and the legend the public wanted her to be. Part of the problem was Lucy's personality. She was warm, unfiltered, deeply empathetic, and genuinely affectionate. She hugged people when she met them. She laughed loudly, touched arms playfully, and had a magnetic way of making everyone feel like her closest friend. In an industry built on suspicion and insecurity, her openness stood out. And unfortunately, it also made her an easy target for gossip. A simple inside joke with a co-star could become a tabloid headline. A friendly conversation in a studio hallway could morph into a rumor before lunch. Desi Arnaz didn't make things easier. Their marriage, as passionate as it was also notoriously volatile. Their loud arguments, emotional reconciliations, and constant misunderstandings created a storm the press eagerly fed on. Whenever tensions rose at home, Hollywood insiders assumed Lucy must be seeking comfort elsewhere. It wasn't true, but truth didn't sell newspapers. Scandal did. Lucy became the centerpiece of stories she didn't write. Behind the scenes, she battled something deeper, loneliness. Even with Desi by her side, even surrounded by fame and success, Lucy often felt isolated. When you're the biggest star in television history, everyone knows your face, but very few truly know your heart. And that vulnerability made her relationships, even purely professional ones, look more intimate than they were. She created deep emotional bonds with many of her co-stars, because that's simply who she was. Into Hollywood, those bonds looked like fuel for speculation. Actors like William Holden, Henry Fonda, and James Stewart admired her professionalism and charisma. She had a way of energizing any room she walked into. People leaned toward her, literally and emotionally. That kind of gravitational pull inspired endless stories. Some cast members even said Lucy made you feel like the only person in the world when she talked to you. That was her gift, but also her curse. By the mid-1950s, the rumors about Lucy's supposed affairs had become so common that studio executives began addressing it behind closed doors. They feared these whisper campaigns could tarnish the pristine image of America's favorite redhead. But Lucy refused to let anyone police her friendships. She would not apologize for being kind, confident, emotional, or expressive. She had spent years building her career with grit and determination, and she refused to be reduced to gossip headlines written by people who couldn't stand the idea of a strong woman thriving without scandal. Yet the whispers continued. Even people who adored her couldn't resist speculating. Fans, co-stars, journalists, everyone wanted a piece of Lucy's private life, and ironically, the more famous she became, the less control she had over her narrative. She could command a set, transform a script, and bring audiences to tears with her comedy. But she couldn't stop people from inventing stories about who she supposedly loved. What Lucy did control, however, was her dignity. She never named names. She never fed the gossip machine. She understood that once you start defending every rumor, you'll spend your entire life playing defense. Instead, she focused on her craft, on the brilliance that made her a legend, and she left the whispers where they belonged, drifting through the hallways of old Hollywood, never confirmed, never denied, never validated, because the truth was simple. Lucy's real story was far more compelling than any rumor. She wasn't defined by the men in her life. She was defined by her fire, her talent, and her relentless fight for respect in an industry that wasn't built to give it to her. As Lucille Ball grew older, the rumors that once swirled around her like wildfire began to fade into something else entirely. Legend. The stories Hollywood whispered about her supposed affairs became less like accusations and more like folklore. Fragments of a past that showed just how fiercely the world had been fascinated with her. People weren't really asking, did she, anymore? They were asking, why were people so desperate to believe she did? The answer was simple. Lucille Ball was different. She was too powerful, too talented, too independent for her era. Hollywood didn't know what to do with a woman who didn't fit neatly into the boxes the studios built for their stars. a woman who ran her own empire, who produced her own show, who negotiated contracts like a mogul instead of a celebrity. In the 1950s, a woman with that kind of authority was unheard of and threatening. So the gossip machine did what it always does when faced with a woman it can't control. It tried to reduce her to romantic speculation. Lucy knew it. She saw it. She felt it, and yet she refused to bow to it. By the late years of her life, she spoke more openly about the pressures she faced, the loneliness that came with fame, and the price of being a trailblazer. But she never indulged the rumor mill. She never confirmed a name, never admitted anything to fuel tabloids, and never validated the stories that tried to define her. Instead, she let the speculation die naturally, buried under the sheer weight of her accomplishments, because that was the truth the gossip writers never wanted to admit. Lucille Ball didn't become a legend because of who she loved. She became a legend because of what she built. Behind the scenes, Lucy dealt with heartbreak far more real than any rumor. Her marriage to Desi Arnaz crumbled under the pressure of fame and their clashing personalities. Their love was deep, fierce, and unforgettable, but not sustainable. When they divorced, the tabloids didn't care about the pain or the years of effort she had poured into keeping their family together. They cared only about the scandal, but Lucy rose above it, as she always did. She kept working. She kept pushing. She kept making history. She became the first woman to run a major Hollywood studio, Desilu Productions, a company responsible for creating some of the most groundbreaking television in history. She discovered talent, approved scripts, protected writers, and ignored every attempt to minimize her achievements. Some of the very men she was rumored to have been involved with publicly praised her professionalism, her intelligence, and her vision. Their respect spoke louder than any gossip ever could. In her later years, Lucy reflected on the strange duality of her life. The public adored the character of Lucy Ricardo, while the industry often struggled to accept the real Lucille Ball, the woman who refused to be controlled. She once said, "I'm not funny. What I am is brave." And perhaps that bravery is what made her story so irresistible to the gossip mill. A woman that strong, that brilliant, that influential. She had to be tied to powerful men, they believed. She couldn't possibly have built her empire alone. But she did, in the end. The truth about the 6 actors she was rumored to have relationships with was simple. The rumors said more about Hollywood's insecurities than they ever said about Lucy herself. She carried those whispers with her, not as shame, but as evidence of how terrified the industry once was of a woman who couldn't be silenced. And when she finally left this world, she left behind something far more enduring than any tabloid story, a legacy of innovation. Comedy and courage that inspired every generation that followed. Lucille Ball didn't need rumors to be unforgettable. She was unforgettable because she earned it, and because she lived a life too extraordinary for Hollywood to ever fully understand.